there, creatives. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Creative Psychotherapist Podcast. It's another one in the special series for the Voices from the Expressive Therapies Summit. Today, you're going to hear a conversation that I had with Canadian based art therapist Maria Riccardi. And we really spoke about the Expressive Therapies Continuum, which is something that she's going to be presenting on with a couple of panels of people at the upcoming summit. And we also talked about like the importance of play in your life as a therapist. And I just really appreciated hearing her philosophy about that. And I hope that you enjoy listening to this episode.
The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative, focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist Podcast. I'm your host, Raina Lombardi, and I'm delighted to welcome my next guest to the show as part of our Expressive Therapies Summit special series. We're interviewing different therapists that are going to be providing training at the upcoming conference in November 2022. And today I'm speaking with Maria Riccardi. She is a doctoral candidate. She has a Master of Arts, a Master of Education. She is a registered art therapist, a career counselor, a licensed clinical psychotherapist, and board member of the Quebec Art Therapy Association. She is an adjunct professor of art therapy at Concordia University and at UCAT. She is an adjunct professor. Oh, excuse me. I am running on, as well as a faculty member at Winnipeg Holistic Expressive Arts Therapy Institute. She collaborates with local nonprofit organizations and mental health institutions, developing community-based art studio programs for adolescents and adults who are marginalized due to mental and physical health issues, immigration issues, and poverty. She has expertise with veterans living with combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder within the context of trauma intervention, as well as in the evaluation of art processes and products during treatment. She has founded a clinic in Montreal based on the Expressive Therapies Continuum, providing educational and emotional support to children and families. Her current research interests include media properties and their role in assessment, as well as school-based art therapy with immigrant adolescents. Welcome, Maria. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you to have me here, actually.
So you're busy. You're doing a lot.
Yes, yeah, but I like playing a lot and I like doing a lot. So, and for me, art therapy always was a dream for me. And one thing we didn't have to talk about it was I'm an artist too, and maybe what is all the common factors in all this, is making art. So yes, I'm busy, and maybe I'm trying to be less busy to make more art. And I think it's a nice way to start our talk today.
Yeah. So, how much time do you budget for yourself to make your personal art as an art therapist who's busy not only teaching, but doing research and running a practice?
That's a wonderful question to start because art was what brought me here to art therapy. And for me, when my practice go down, I'm like, oh, I have to work a little bit more. So I don't budget my time, but
Mhm.
budget my pieces. So it
Mhm.
depends. But when I look around me and I don't have new pieces coming up, I'm like, okay, Maria, more self-care you have to work on. But however, in art therapy, I'm privileged. There is all of art materials in my studio every time. I always work with the clients when they leave on the table some pastels broken or some paint that is not to waste it. I use it. So I'm always in contact with art.
Mhm.
I use RESP on art with my students and supervision,
Mhm.
and I make art parties for art therapists. I try to combine art and work, but I
Mhm.
think one thing you touched today is I have to leave some space just for the art.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, can you share a little bit about the art parties? That sounds really fun,
Yeah.
and I want to know
Well,
more.
well, I work at the ATQ, l'Association d'Art Thérapie du Québec. So I'm a board member since 2012, and we have always meetings. So in the summer, I said, let's come over to the home. So there was the water, there was pool, there was like art materials, we put canvas outside. So we played. The meeting was more about playing and telling and making art. And wait, I just have one just here from that little art party that I call. So I started to, so we're outside and and everybody work on the same pieces. So that's where I say about art parties. With my neighbor next door, I try to have little moments that we could make art. So I think is like, yeah, and the conferences try
Mhm.
to reunite. So yes, those are art parties that we try to do.
No, I think that that's an important part. Like for most of us, I think the art brings us whatever it is. If you're a music therapist, it's the music that brings you to the field, right? If you're a dance therapist, it's the
Yeah,
dance that brings you. And I think that that is an important part of um, really doing our job well is staying connected with the art,
yeah,
which can be hard
yeah.
sometimes.
It is hard, but something that comes to mind is in Quebec, we just collaborated to create le regroupement des thérapeutes par les arts. It's a regroupment of music and psychodrama and dance and art therapists and um, and drama therapists all together. And the
Mhm.
goal was, yes, to be recognized, but the goal was to make more art together and share the skills and share the love. So it's like for the expressive therapies, it's so good. We'll see everybody putting back together their pieces of art. So my dream is to have like I'm Italian, so to have
Mhm.
a hall party with music therapists, dance therapists, everybody, all the therapists together, and just having an event. And
Mhm.
that could be a wonderful way to reconnect and then to build bridges and then to work sometimes, but not to forget the play.
Yeah, that's so important. I think that that's at the core of what brought the Expressive Therapy Summit into existence, right? So like
Yeah.
be able to pull all of these different therapists working in different ways, but at the core,
Mm,
we're all using our creativity and tapping from the well of within in order to help people better understand themselves and heal and grow. Um, yeah, so it's fun to get together with everybody and
yes.
play. What's your favorite way to play?
Having music around, and I used to dance, so come back to dance a little bit. And I enjoy DVT, like, so a lot when we just start to be like in a playground. I like silly play too, that is not too organized.
Hmm.
I have children now, they're getting bigger, but taking time to laugh and maybe having a good meal. I love like having my husband cook, so he makes those wonderful meals and we sit. So all these little rituals, that's more playing for
Hmm.
me. Yeah.
I love that you brought food. Food, I feel like is an important, like that's an important thing for me
Yeah.
too. And it's one of the ways I play. I love to cook and I feel like it's super
Yeah.
creative. And It can be so spontaneous. I'm not very good at following recipes and following directions, so I don't
Yeah.
bake well.
Yeah. But by playing, it comes really well, right?
Hmm.
You know, it's fun because that's where the link I'm going to make you with the ETC, the Expressive Therapies Continuum. I had a wonderful professor, name was Yagar in Quebec. He passed away, so it was a big influence. And expressive therapies for me, and I'm linking the humanistic theory with DTC, is having a buffet, small or large. And I see as like you become the host and you invite your client to come and you provide choices.
Mm.
And then people, they come slowly and have choices and you start to know their taste and how they savor life. And slowly you make choices together. When the next time they come and see you, like the menu or the choices are really in sync to their life, who they are. And
Mm.
then with time, there's, I call them aversions, which are wonderful to work. You may want to put up this other place that we might not use or don't create. So for me, art therapy is also a way that people come and again, they're a guest, and you're the host, and you share a bit of your studio or your home with them. And then, like you said, we co-create the plays, and then we start playing, and paints goes everywhere, and pastels go around. And then you start to really know the person. And
Hmm.
I find that's a wonderful metaphor for me as well, food and art.
I love that. And it's nurturing, right? You're playing and you're creating, but then you're also like feeding yourself, you're feeding and caring for the people that you're sharing that meal with. And yeah, can be really fun to try new things too.
Exactly.
Hmm. Yeah. So, how did you? I know that your practice is very focused on the ETC. What about that particular theoretical model really drew you in? Because it seems like that's kind of the the like kind of the spine of your work. It kind of
Yeah.
runs through everything.
Actually, my life, pretty much, you know. So I
Mm.
think Lisa Hines inspired me. I was privileged at when I decided to change career and to go back because since 16 I was always like I fell in love with art therapy pretty much, you know, and as I mentioned out of the podcast, you know, we since 16 I always went to the expressive therapies or the American Art Therapy Association
Hmm.
like pretty regularly, you know. But I was always in the back, like in the back and looking and not speaking. And when I met Kramer or it was Bruce Moon that I was really enjoy their work. For me, it was very inspiring. So in 2012, I took in 2000 maybe eight around, I took a plane and I went to study in States in the USA because
Oh.
I heard that in 2009 the book opened with Lisa Hines on the Expressive Therapies Continuum. So I started to study, and I'll make a link. My husband took care of the home and of the children, so I was fed emotionally and physically. So I was able to go to my dream. So I started to
Wow.
study with Lisa Hines, and that was the book in 2009 that I started to come alive. Like, don't forget, in 1978, it was Lusenbrink and Caging and Lusenbrink, Sandra Alkov, later in her name, that started the base of DTC,
Mm-hmm.
and they both just passed away.
Yeah.
Lusenbrink just passed away, but Lisa retook this recipe and to another recipe, because it's not a recipe, I'm sorry. She took this theory and she made into a book that is more for all of us, vulgarizing the terms.
Hmm.
So I studied with Lisa. So to make a long
Wonderful.
story short, I fell in love with it. And the first day I graduated, I went to present and I started to change from back to come a bit more in the front and to come at the conference. And I promised myself to always present. So the
Mm.
ETC for me is knowing who I am. As you could see now, I'm very kinesthetic.
Hmm.
So I always think, don't forget, be more sensory.
So
Take
Listeners can't
time.
see, but yes, you're very expressive with your body and your hands and arms and everything. So if you're
Yeah.
listening,
So,
yeah.
so to balance myself, culturally and like, and who I am, then oh, Maria's more sensory. Like, don't take the time to talk slower, taste your world and your words. And
Mm,
then, so I really fell in love with the theory behind it. I'm very affect. How can I get away from the emotions? How can I come back? It was just made sense for me.
mhm.
And this was a starting a love story. That's what it was.
So, for listeners that might not be familiar with the continuum, would you mind sharing a little bit about how it's structured so that
Yeah,
they can kind of get a better understanding of that? I think some listeners probably are, but I think others probably
yeah.
aren't.
So I'll try to do it in a nutshell, the ETC. But first of all, it's about art materials. And
Hmm.
that's not a reason that I fell in love with the theory because, oh, paint could give you more affect if I use a lot of water. Whereas collage maybe helped me to be more structured. So that was interesting. It was looking at materials. And DTC comes from a lot of the other theories. It borrowed from different ways of thinking. Like you said before, when you made your recipe at the beginning, you take things around
Hmm.
and then it makes something great about it. So DTC, what I really enjoyed is you could really look from different perspectives. So to make it very maybe more clear, based on development. So
Hmm.
if you look at as a child or in drama therapy too, in DVT, you play, the playing and the senses are base of your development. So
Yeah.
if I take, for example, paper now and I rip it very quickly, I get hot and the pleasure of ripping, it's more kinesthetic.
Hmm.
On the other side of the continuum, if I start to simply taste or sensorily play with my pastels and they're very close to my paper, I tap on a part of me as a child that it was so easy to be, and I could rebring it myself as an adult to bring back my senses. And then it develops to a bit higher continuum, and you look at the perceptual and the affect.
Hmm.
And I said before, affect. If I take now, like in this painting here, I was pouring water, I mean, it was going on the grass in my little party. Red, it made me feel we were laughing, we're enjoying the day, a lot of affect.
Hmm.
Now, if I use material that I take a bigger distance, a broader distance, like pencils maybe,
Hmm.
and I use a form colors, or I draw a mandala, it's perceptual. I go a bit higher and you have the cognitive and the symbolic. And
Hmm.
the cognitive, it's making plans, writing my conferences, if I make art, doing a complex collage and try to put the pieces all together. And then we have the symbolism, which giving sense to the experience.
Hmm.
So symbolism, what is life is about, who I am as a human, fate in my life, or friendship I have. And we try to, like I say, to target the creativity. And this is could be not as a hierarchy important. It could be in every level, or it could
Right.
my easy to change in every level. And creativity, and there's a last article of Lisa Hines that when Lusenbrink, and there was a third author, I don't have the name now, just to look at it, that talked about how we tap in our creativity. So DETC is a way of being alive. It's a way of being in life as well. And it looks at art materials, but it looks at us, how as an art therapist, I could look into my own way of seeing the world, of being in the world, and how can I have a relationship with my clients, about the audience too. And maybe the last thing to be more clear is there's an assumption that if I look at someone, how they make art, how they create, I can have a sense of who they are in the everyday life. So we have potential in the same setting to make quick changes always with the client. Like we're not in a medical setting, we're more into a collaborative setting here. And
Right.
maybe we say, oh, it was so great, this drop of red in my painting. I need to laugh and to feel more. And we try to bring the client or the human being or the artist outside in the world and change it. So that was maybe a quick,
I love
very,
that. So it's a very passionate. I hear and see your passion for this approach because it really does tap into um, the human experience. It's not
yeah,
pathologizing in any way, right?
exactly. And, I mean, and for my work, and I can't talk too much about some clients because of the confidentiality, but I'm honored. I see them as a work of art. And I see when they play with new materials, when they take risks, and when they dare of trying something they never thought of trying for
Mhm,
themselves. So the ETC gives me this like, I think maybe this playground. And
mhm,
I don't go there into a one mindset, but we discuss, we talk about, and I want to just say a quick word about the author. I mean the authors, but
mhm,
Lisa Hines, the author, the way she really always brought forward the humanity of someone that works. And yes, it's not around finding a diagnosis. It's more around playing and find who you are and go practice it outside and then
mhm.
choose who you are. It's about choice.
Choice. I think it can be a real powerful experience to help somebody move through different different media as a way of helping them to feel more at ease within themselves, which is, really interesting to work with, um, somebody who, like, every time they come in, they only want to use pencil and eraser, and they need that sense of control, in predictability in
Yeah.
the way they're working, and to move them, with them over
Yeah.
time
Yes,
to be like
exactly.
using water paint.
Yeah. Or, or using the pens in different ways, And one thing important, you move someone if they want to move, they might not need to move. And that's where it is. But I love that. And one thing I would love to look at in research is each material they have in themselves in a continuum. So
Mhm,
it's interesting. And one thing we didn't speak about is the canvases. What kind of canvases? What is hoping the wall, the sheet, uh, the world, the land. So I think is all this that for me is like, let's think more about materials than just
mhm.
about diagnosis. And that's what I enjoy. So the artist, it taps in the artist in me a little bit too.
Yeah, there's so many great ways of being outside and using all of the natural materials that are available outside to create. I've done some really fun things on the beach with sand and then
Yeah,
collected materials. And it's really powerful, I think, to be in a different setting, not a clinical one,
yeah,
facilitating these kinds of experiences, because that too, it takes away from that there's something wrong here. There's nothing wrong.
yeah.
We're we're just going through this life and figuring it out.
Yeah, and I think something that I'm thinking about is clinical. It doesn't mean it's like it's another lens. It's simply it's looking at different lens. The same client or artist, you could see him or her into more like, yes, the hospital send you someone, you have to look at the clinical, but wait a second, there's more to it. The
Mhm,
humanity and
mhm,
the energy and the family. So I think the ETC is giving me different lenses, and
mhm,
then it makes more a whole portrait. And I think, and as a clinician, it's very nice because I look at the core of someone, try to get it. and knowing that I will never get it either. And that's why it's a collaborative approach.
Yeah.
And you kind of teach or give the person who works with you the tools to become their own artist or their own specialist,
Hmm.
which is makes sense.
Yeah. I think too, there's something that can happen when we are in a studio space or in a space that doesn't feel um, like like a medical environment,
Yeah,
right?
but you know, something I want a client that I went to work at the hospital with her, you know. So and Lisa Hines always said UETC kit could be in a small box. It was interesting that I brought in a medical setting all the materials that were allowed in a psychiatric setting, and the room became a playground. So the theory itself makes you see a setting different because I'm honored at the clinic to have this wonderful big studio. It's a privilege and an honor, but
Hmm.
sometimes you get a box, but the shoebox could contain a lot, I've realized. And that's what makes sense to be able to change a setting, bring people outside to work in COVID times, for example,
Hmm.
be more creative. And this is where the Expressive Therapies Continuum give me this like this little lens. You know?
Yeah, it allows you to see the client in a different way, for sure. I know that one of the workshops you're going to be presenting with Lisa Hines is you're going to be talking about the ETC as a framework for developing cultural awareness. Can you share a little bit about why this particular approach is a really helpful model for working within um, different cultures and why it's so approachable?
Well, first, you know, as we said at the beginning, um, I get attracted to humans, right? So Megan Whyte, she's like, she was my student, became one of my greatest colleagues. She has a lot of nice publication about first, she's from First Nations in Kanawage in near Montreal. And she brought, I mean, when I was a supervisor, I was saying, oh, I'm learning so much more from you than I could give you. I felt in every sense of the way. And it was Lisa that I always have this, you know, in the book she writes, it's funny, often when I read her books, I'm like, this is her, it's not a theory. You know, so there is two wonderful humans. So, and what I've learned from Megan in her thesis and in her publication, she looked at materials for identity, the way like borrowed materials from Eastern, Western cultures, and the way shame was within this, and the way she was able to juggle and put things together. So, why? Because I'll be working with Megan and Lisa. That's the first thing, creating a workshop based on the land, you know, and looking at cultures. I'm a second generation um, immigrants in Montreal. So my dad and my mom came from Italy, and in my doctoral degree now, I'm looking at refugees and working in school systems and how they bring into the art therapy their own life and the
Mhm.
narrative history. So to make it in a very maybe a short way today, looking at narrative therapy and looking at cultural upbringings, looking at working with Megan and look at our history in Quebec, you
Mhm.
know, about our land, the way we would define the land. So yeah, so we're putting now this workshop together, and we would like Megan and Lisa and I write a chapter together. So it's like again, we're
Oh.
putting up ingredients, and we hope from the workshop learning two at the same time because we're not the specialist, we all are specialists. So that's a fun adventure. Yeah.
Oh, no, that sounds amazing. And I think you bring up such an important point that, and it's about the power dynamics when we're working with clients or when we're supervising or training other
Yeah.
people, that there is a co-creative experience that's occurring, a co-edifying experience that's occurring,
Yeah,
that we are learning and having that shared thing between us. Um,
exactly. And you know, when I'm working at the Whyte Institute, in Manitoba, that's where I had to change, completely how I was teaching. And I'm like, wow, it's not just about learning Maria and reading, it's about living and having great supervisors around me that help me in my way. And one thing always think, and you said when you're a supervisor, I always tell my students, it's a dance. We're dancing together because now I'll lead you a bit more, but you'll be leading me down the way. So it's like changing spaces into a round table. And this is how we could co-create and learn from other wonderful art therapists too. That's why I'm in art therapy, is to play.
I,
Intellectual parties and paint parties. Yeah.
I, I love that. I think that oftentimes just within our systems there is there's like a certain very limiting definition of what play is, right? That play is something that is not of value, or it's not of high priority for some reason. And I certainly don't believe that at all. I feel like play is where we learn the most, through play.
Yeah, it's where we co-create the most, is when we're bored. When you play, you're allowed to be bored a little bit because you have to find idea, nothing is structured. And I find that's where like great ideas comes from. So I think it's for me is more that, and to come back at the beginning of the interview is like, yes, I need to create more space to play because play makes you more connection, more ideas, more yes.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. So yeah, so this workshops is for me was playing with people that I enjoy to work with,
Mm.
to do something, to collaborate and to
Hmm.
create a new story.
I love that. I was recently doing some like mindset coaching for myself, around resistance that I was experiencing to complete a certain project that I've been working on. And what really came out of it was that my resistance isn't the resistance to the work. It's my body saying, you need to play.
Eh, yes. Yes, and allowed yourself to play
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
allowed yourself to make mistakes. On your plate, there's a lot of mistakes, and we don't mind. They're good. They bring something else. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like play is so central to the work, helping people to be playful, to learn how to
Yeah,
play, to not take things so seriously. Um, right. That it'll
yeah.
be okay. If we make a mistake, it's okay. If we don't
Actually,
pass
it's good.
something, it's okay.
It's
Yeah.
okay. It's good, actually. If you use it, it makes you just see the world differently. And when you work, we worked in the military for over 10 years. And I realized we have to taste the mistakes. We have to accept them in our life. This is how we become humanized. One of my clients told me, you have to fell pretty down to rise again. Yeah.
Mm.
And if you don't fall, you're not gonna rise. So it's like, let's fall down. When you play, what do? You go in the floor. You touch the floor. I think that's where this theory come from. It's my own way of seeing art therapy.
Hmm. Yeah. No, it's a beautiful approach. Um, I would love if you kind of shared a little bit about your philosophy around creating space for growing. I think it really taps into what we've been talking about. But how important is that for you in your work?
Well, I'll give you maybe a quick answer from yesterday. I work at l'Université du Québec on Abitibi-Témiscamingue. It's l'UQAT. And we had to put together this wonderful day for the professors who will teach this new adventure for this year. So we're thinking, how do we grow? So let's invite someone to give a workshop on compassion fatigue. So we invite Catherine Emmanuel Drapeau, a great art therapist and future psychologist in Quebec that uses response art with her work.
Oh.
Then we said, let's get a good meal to eat together. So we had this wonderful person that cooks vegan food by herself and created this new industry. So let's invite her to come and provide us a meal. So, so we had this little bee coming inside and those smells. And then we had some meetings about supervision. And the first question was, what do you need this year? So the whole day was very improvised by a couple of meetings about what they need, not our own agenda, having a good meal together and connect again, because we're about 20 art therapists together about. And then we were like making art together and someone having a response art, reminding her to make art, reminding all of us. So creating growth, it could be a simple way of changing the way a meeting is organized, you know?
Mm. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by my practice, Florida Art Therapy Services. And we provide art therapy services, mental health services, and high quality supervision for licensed folks in Florida, as well as for art therapy credentials. And we also provide uh, experiential based continuing education programming. And we provide that for licensed folks in the state of Florida, but also our continuing ed can be used to satisfy the requirements for the Art Therapy Credentials Board continuing education requirements. And we have a couple of courses that really focus on developing supervisory practice. One is a 12-hour Florida qualified supervisor training. It's a 2-day training. And we have a couple of options coming up this fall for folks. We're going to have an in-person, in-office training, which will be limited to 15 people on September 24th and 25th, 2022. And it's going to be awesome. We're going to be engaging in lots of really great experiential activities. I teach this class with Amy Strom, who's a licensed clinical social worker. And part of what we do is have you engage in creating a sand tray about your supervisory identity, and as our kind of culminating event at the end of day 2, which is always really fun. We haven't done it in person since pandemic hit, so we're really excited about that. We also have another Zoom training, also 2 days, and that's going to be October 15th and 16th, 2022. And we'll still engage in experiential activities, and we make plenty use of the breakout rooms and interactive group discussion and things. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, if you're a licensed therapist in the state of Florida, please go ahead and head over to our website, floridaarttherapyservices.com, and you can find that under the continuing education tab under 12-hour Florida qualified supervisor. And I haven't added the next date yet, but we will have a date coming up for a 6-hour supervision and art therapy training, which I hosted earlier this year, which was really wonderful. We go over theory, structure, applications, practical aspects, plus didactic and experiential based activities to really synthesize the learning that we're engaged in. And so we'll be adding another opportunity for that this fall. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can find that under the continuing education tab as well. And we have a couple of other trainings too coming up. So check that out and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Creating growth, I'm lucky. I will be going to the Eclectic Conference, Lithuania, with a lot of my colleagues around the world, you know. And the first thing I did is got my phone and said, are we having a little party on Thursday and eat together? This is how, and then yes, there's a conference, and yes, there is meetings, and there is research meetings. But if you want to create growth, you have to make the plant grow. And in this busy time, create space. And for Cynthia, and we have the ATQ coming in, we have a big conference and not complicated. Who could present? How could we have an art hives, that we could make art together? So you put together a couple, like you said, ingredients and you grow. And the last thing is meet your friends or therapists for a tea or coffee or just a walk around. This is where you could grow as a community. So
Love
yes,
that.
I think for me is this is the same thing for your family, because without my family and my friends, I won't have time to do all of this. And that's how I have self-care. And Catherine Moon said in a conference a wonderful word, community care.
Mm.
So to do that, you have to create space to meet and grow. Yeah, so that's where I come from.
I love that. I really it really stuck with me, that intentional creation of a plan for growth to happen. That if we don't
Yeah.
do that, then we're not giving ourselves the opportunity.
Exactly. And like another flash comes in my mind is when I was teaching and I call my colleagues around the world, and Gus Sack said yes, and Lisa Hines said yes, and Megan said yes. And they all came in a small course to share their knowledge with soul. And I was like, look
Mm,
how I want to look good because of them. I find this, and I'll give my time back when they ask. I
yeah.
think it's creating growth and making this like an alliance and an exchange too, when sometimes it's not always easy. So for all this, I'm really grateful for yeah, to dance on the dance floor at each conference. That's where you create the most connections.
Uh, Definitely. That's always a fun time, the
Yeah,
dancing. Um, but I really also hear that growth doesn't come from the individual. It comes from
mhm.
the connectivity with the people in your community, that you're uplifting and sharing and collaborating,
Yeah.
that's where the growth really occurs.
And same thing for the garden. If you're away and someone comes water for you, and the bees come and savor your plants to give a growth to them, and then and the people around you help you grow. And it's fun. My garden at home, I have plants for friends or therapists that I've met in my year, and I see them as flowers. And would never have such a beautiful garden. And I say in
Mhm.
a metaphor now, if I didn't allowed seeds to come and from every side. So that's where you could create growth in your own private practice. So in your teaching is allow them to say, I'm just a human. Let's exchange what we have, and let's see how we could make this a wonderful experience or wonderful moment
I
to
love
be.
that. I love that. Um, there's so much greater benefit when we approach the work that we do through the lens of collaboration versus
Yeah,
competition.
yeah,
And it's so much more powerful too.
exactly.
Yeah. So I know we talked a little bit about the 3-hour workshop that you're going to be doing on the 6th with Megan and Lisa on kind of the multicultural topic related to the ETC. But I know you have a full day workshop as well on the 19th. Can you share a little bit about what that is going to be about for
Yeah.
listeners?
Well, Lisa Hein orchestrated, like, all like who we collaborate every time into a whole day workshop. So it's first, like, she will start the play by introducing the ATC and all the myths and the dispelling myths and what it is, all this wonderful way of seeing our art interventions in our therapy. And then we have following Lisa, Megan VanMeter, which she worked closely with Sandra Alcott,
Okay. Mhm.
So and she looked at the media dimension variables. all into the art media, and she's so clever about it, and she's passionate. So she'll bring this into our day to follow up with Joshua Kinmanan. We were studying together in 2009 at the time. Uh, Wonderful colleagues who brought art therapy into music, play, movement, more into the expressive side of it. Because one thing important is the DETC comes for the expressive therapist. It wasn't made just for art therapists.
Mm-hmm.
So where our wish is expressive art therapists will take it and research about it. So it will look more about movement and rhythm,
Mm.
especially he looked at clay as a wonderful medium that touches all the components and the levels of the
Absolutely.
ETC. And a little break for lunch, and I'll start, I guess, the second half of the day. When I was a student, I created in my one of my work the art therapist self inquiry. So it was the idea I have, what about if I looked at myself, where I am in the world, through art making,
Mm.
and then I look at my clients or my artists, and then try to see where the transference comes and how I work in a way, in another way of doing response art in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if I look, it's funny, if I look at my studio and at my art materials and I look inside, what am I missing? What I forget to bring because I may not enjoy bringing a lump of clay, but it might be missing in the studio. And following me, and that day it'll be Nancy Choe, who work at cognition and symbolism and the use of poetry and DETC. And
Oh.
then there'll be a little panel at the end, and we will be all there to answer questions. So it's a kind of a ETC day to look at the expressive therapies continuum through the expressive lens as well.
I love that. It sounds like it's going to be really amazing. So much learning and different ways of thinking about
Yeah.
the model, which is
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah,
And
and we always meet between each other for conference. Like we always collaborate, so we all tinted pretty much into everybody's work as well. So it's more how we could bring this all together. Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
excited.
Now it sounds really fun and I really appreciate what you're saying about, taking an inventory of all the different materials that you have accessible, because just because you don't particularly like something doesn't mean it should be omitted from the
Yeah,
options for the clients. It
yeah.
makes me think of like miniatures. When
Yes.
sand tray therapists collect miniatures and like making sure that you're collecting things that you might not like.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because when I teach, I do teach sand play at UCAT, and then in my own
Oh.
studio, I have no miniatures. And this last year, I started to read more about it. I'm not a specialist in sandray, but I do borrow some techniques of sandplay. And the way the miniatures changed some clients, and I was like, look at you. You forgot to look at what you miss, music elements, and maybe more bodily, without being a specialist, without taking away from the expertise of auto expressive therapists. I might need this to still have in my work. So exactly. So again, we come back at the aversions. Aversion is not what you don't like, it's what you forget to put in or what you say no. And this is what we will look at in the conference.
Ah, I love it. It sounds like it's going to be an amazing opportunity and experience for
Yeah.
folks that attend and participate. And they have two options, the 6th and the 19th of November. And it's online, so people can
I
join
know.
from all over the world, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah. If people wanted to learn more about you and your work and what you do, where can they find you, Maria?
Well, first, I invite you to come at the conferences so we could really work together. And I have a website. I have my own private practice, and it's
Mhm.
funny because I often in my own practice, I have people they the time they use the a lot of art therapists use the spaces, so it's nice to become a little collaboration of these. I'm not too far from the AATQ, which is the Association of Art Therapy of Quebec, in the same
Mm.
floor. So if you're in Montreal and Quebec, or you want to come here, you could meet me at my own space. But if not, it will be like my website, and it's like it's Clinic Images ETC for the Expressive Therapies Continuum, because yes, I adore having a space where we all could play together.
I love that. So if you're interested, her website is https://images etc.ca/en, and that should get you to her website. But I definitely encourage you to head over to the Expressive Therapies Summit website, which is simply www.expressivetherapiesummit.com. And you can find the presentations that she's going to be co-presenting on available, and of course so much more, so many wonderful
Yes,
opportunities to learn from some really amazing people doing wonderful work from all over the world. And I'm so grateful for you making the time today, Maria.
thank you. Actually, I'm privileged that you came and asked me to. That's really nice to be there.
Oh, thank you. I hope that the conference is a huge success. And
I'm sure. Pretty sure. Yes. And yes, and it will be very nice to meet. And anybody who would like to reach me, my email is on the website, just to ask questions or to collaborate in any work, like I'm always there. I'm always open to respond and to help too.
Awesome. That's so generous. And I'll include your contact information, of
Yeah.
course, links to the conference and
Yeah.
everything in the show notes. So if you're listening and you're driving, don't worry, just go back and you can find those links at the end.
Good. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the great work you also do. And thank you to bring us all together through this wonderful window of the world, we call it now, pretty much.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you making the time to talk to me and being willing
Thank you.
to share your voice with the world. Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. If you like what you hear and you enjoy the conversations with the guests that we have on the show, please, please, if you don't mind, take a couple of moments to rate, to provide some feedback, to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to the show. I really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Maria Riccardi today. She's going to be presenting at the Expressive Therapies Summit in November. Of course, it's online, so you can attend from wherever you are. Around the world, since it's going to be on Zoom, and you can find more about the amazing sessions that she's going to be teaching, the workshops that she's going to be teaching, by heading to www.expressivetherapysummit.com. She's going to be presenting a 3-hour workshop on the 6th of November in the afternoon on the Expressive Therapies Continuum as a framework for developing cultural awareness. And then she's also going to be on another panel on the 19th, which is an all-day workshop. And that's going to be the Expressive Therapies Continuum, an essential framework for using expressive arts and therapy. And there's a whole host of folks that she's going to be presenting with that day. I really loved the way she thinks about how the continuum applies to everything that she does, and kind of her approach to playfulness, and really making sure that she's making time to cultivate that for herself so that she feels renewed and energized in the work. I just really appreciated her perspective in our conversation, and I hope you did too. All right. We'll talk to you next week, and we'll be sharing another episode from the series with a colleague that she's going to be presenting with on the 19th, Megan VanMeter.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.